Welcome to Teaching Tuesdays, where we go through the Bible verse by verse. We are currently in Matthew chapter 24, and we're going to be starting in verse 15 today. I want to kind of do a little bit of a backtrack on what we've been talking about, but last week we left it off that verses 4 through 14 was an overview of the entire tribulation period. This includes the ramp up to and the first part of the tribulation into the second part of the tribulation, where they will hate those that are believers and Israelites, and they're going to seek to destroy them, and then the end is going to come. We take a break, though, and we say back after he's answered the question of when is the end of time, when is the end of the world, or the end of the age, which is in verse 14. It says, and then shall the end come. Now we're going to talk about the next subject or the next question, which is, what shall be the sign of thy coming? Now remember, when the disciples asked this question, they had no idea anything about the church. They didn't know anything about end times. They just assumed since the temple was going to be destroyed, it would have to be the end of time. Therefore, when they asked the Lord about these questions, their point of view was, tell us about the end of time. When is it that you're coming back? Because the Bible always talks about God coming back. So this is what Jesus is answering. When is the end of the world? Well, we just went through that on verses 4 through 14 and tells us the end of the world. Now Jesus is going to drill in and he's going to tell us about his coming back. What shall be the sign of thy coming? So here we start in verse 15, and verse 15 actually starts midway through the tribulation. And you say, well, Dave, how do you know that that's midway through the tribulation? Well, first off, let's read the verse. It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoever so readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judah flee for the mountains. And the best thing to do now would be, let's turn over to Daniel and let's look at this, because we need to figure out what it is that Jesus is talking about. So if you turn over to Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to look at verse 26, 27. So verse 26 says, after 62 weeks. Now, if we go back to the beginning of this chapter, we find out that Daniel's asked God a question, and God sends the messenger back with the answer. And the answer is, Daniel, I have set 70 weeks. And when the Bible says weeks, it means 7 years. So 77-week periods. Hope that makes sense. So there's going to be 77-year periods that are described to Israel. And at the end of that 70th week of 7, or 70th 7-year period, that God is coming again, and he's going to judge the earth. He's going to do all these things to make it an end of iniquity, and all sorts of things that he's going to do. And so he's given Daniel, he says, after 490 years, this is going to happen. Well, it says in verse 26, after 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. So in the 69th week, it says the Messiah is going to die. He's going to be cut off, but not for himself. So this is when Jesus died on the cross. Now, if you take what Daniel said, 490 weeks, and you look up, or 490 years, and you look up and do the math, you find out that Jesus came into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry on the donkey 483 years to the day that Daniel prophesied this. And this is when Jesus was coming in. And at this point, the Jewish people rejected Jesus. He died on the cross. And that's when the church started. He died on the cross, he was buried and rose again, and consequently started the church age, instituted the church, and that's going to draw to an end pretty soon. But we have a pause on the 69th year. We are waiting for that 70th year to take effect. Now, back in Matthew 24, no one knew there was going to be a gap between the 70th year and the 69th year. Here it says, at the 69th year, he will be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the thereof will be of a flood unto the end of the war. Desolations are determined. So, what's going to happen? Jesus is going to die. The Messiah is going to be cut off, and then the temple and the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed. Well, in 70 AD, the temple and the city were destroyed. The temple was destroyed, and Jesus said, not one stone to be left on top of another. And what happened was it burned. It burned so much, so hot that all the gold dripped down and got between the blocks, and they pried the Roman soldiers pried all the stones apart to get all that gold, and that's how every stone was laid to waste, just like Jesus predicted. Now, it says in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. This is our last week. This is the 70th week. And it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many. This is a reference to what you and I would call the Antichrist, the beast that we know of in the last times that is going to make a stand against God with the devil, with the dragon, and the false prophet, and uh, he's going to confirm a covenant. And then it says, in the midst of the week, he should cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Now, that's an interesting thing. A lot of people are looking at this thing called the third temple and the red heifers, and they're going crazy, and Christians would say to me, Dave, why do I even care about the red heifer and the temple and any of that stuff? Because it has nothing to do with Christianity. And I say, you're absolutely 100% right. It means nothing to me, except that I know, according to the book of Daniel, that there's going to be a time that the Antichrist is going to stop the sacrificing and oblation in the temple. Now, in order for that to be stopped, it has to start. In order for it to start, there has to be some things that happen. One of the things that happened is there has to be either a tabernacle or a temple set up. Now, a tabernacle could be set up quickly, very quickly. Within weeks, it could be set up if it was given a chance. Uh, the temple could be set up, but it would be a longer time. I think the Temple Institute talks, a year or two or three, somewhere in there, that this temple could be up and running. But in order to get a priestly line ready to do sacrifices in a temple or a tabernacle, they have to be purified. In order for them to be purified, they have to sacrifice a red heifer, a perfect cow that has only red hair. And that was something prescribed back in the Old Testament, back in Leviticus, about preparing a priest and sanctifying people in order to start these sacrifices. So, in order for these to be stopped, they have to start. In order for them to start, they have to have a place to do the sacrifices. And before they can even have a place to do sacrifices, they have to have people cleansed and ready to go. And so that's where this red heifer and temple tabernacle is an important thing to Christians, because we know, just like the fig tree that we'll talk next week probably, where it says, take the parable of the fig tree. When you see a tree and it's starting to bud and the green leaves are starting to come out, you know that summer is near. Just like this, and when all these things happen, you know that this time is near. And this is one of the things. when we see a red heifer that is sacrificed to cleanse priests, we know we're getting a step closer to the tribulation. We know we're getting a step closer to a temple. Those things have got to start in order for them to stop. But let's keep reading here. And for the overspreading of abominations ye shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that is determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So here in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it talks about this uh, abomination of desolation. And what's going to happen is that the Antichrist or the beast is going to come into the temple, and he is going to say, I am God, and he's going to demand the worship of God. When you should see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand, then let them which be in Judah flee into the mountains. So he's telling you, when you see this, and this is in the middle of the 2 weeks, and there's a guy out there saying, well, how do you know the tribulation's 7 years? It doesn't say 7 years in the Bible. Well, it actually does in Revelation, and we'll get to that sometime. But in Daniel, it tells us there's seven. There's 1 week left. There's one 7 year period left. And in the middle of that 7 years is this abomination of desolation. And we come to Matthew 24, and it tells you when you see this sign. So this means there has to be 3.5 years before this, and then 3.5 years after this, because it's in the middle of the 7 year period. Now it says in here, it says, let him which is on the housetop not come down and take anything out of his house, neither let him that is in the field return back to get clothes. Over in Israel and in that part of the world, the top floor is all their floors are more or less flat, and their top floor is actually a living space as well as the other floors in the house. And so when the Bible says that if you're on the top of the house, if you're at the top floor, don't go down inside to grab clothes, just run. If you're out in the field, just run. Don't go back for anything, because, as it said in the first part, it says they're going to hate you, they're going to kill you. Woe to them that are with child, or them that give suck in those days. If you're pregnant or you're nursing a child, this is the last thing that you need, is to have to flee for the mountains with an infant child or being pregnant. Pray ye that your flight is not in winter or on the Sabbath day. If it's in the winter, just think of trying to carry an infant child or children, or even any of that, your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather, trying to help them flee the mountains during winter or on the Sabbath day. There were so many rules that the Jews had set upon themselves on the Sabbath. They could only walk so far before they had to rest. Otherwise, it wasn't a Sabbath. And all sorts of things that are going on. And Jesus is saying, pray that it's not winter. Pray that it's not the Sabbath when this happens. And then it says, for then shall be great tribulation, as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. This is going to be the worst part of the tribulation, is after this time. Now I've heard a lot of people say stuff about, well, the first 3.5 years are peace. Well, I disagree with that 100%, because the first seals are not peaceful. A quarter of the population dies. That's 2 billion people but die easily in the first 3.5 years. But it's going to be even worse after this happens. The last 3.5 years is going to be unbelievable, untold. And it says, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. And that doesn't mean saved as far as salvation saved, just like it was over in verse 13. This is living through the tribulation. No one's going to live. There's going to be very few that live through there, and he's going to have to shorten those days for their sake. And then it says, and if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is the Christ, or there he is, believe it not, for they should For there shall rise false Christs and false prophets, and show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. So we're going to get an influx of false Christs and false prophets, and we're going to look a little bit more of those prophets here in just a minute. But they are going to be so convincing. They're going to do signs and wonders. In fact, I think in Revelation 13 it talks about how the false prophets is able to do all these wonders in the dragon and the beast's sight, calling fire down from heaven. He's going to look like the prophet. He's going to look like the Christ. It says, even the very elect. Now, the very elect are Israel, the Jews. This is not the church. We're not talking about the church here. We're talking about Jews and even believers in this time period. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in a secret chamber, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. If they tell you that there's a Christ here or the Christ is here, he's in this secret area, he's out in the middle of nowhere, you haven't seen him because he's over here hidden. Jesus is telling you that's not how the Son of Man is coming. This is not how God is coming back to this earth. When Jesus comes back to this earth, it's going to be full display for other people to see. As lightning from the east to the west, you're going to know that this is the Christ. In fact, it says, wheresoever the carcass is, there will be eagles gathered together. You know, when there's a rotting flesh out in the field, you can look up and you can see the birds circling around to come down and devour that. That is the sign that there's something on the ground that's dead. Just like when you see this lightning, you know that this is the Christ, not the one hiding in the desert or in a secret chamber. This is the Christ. Next week, we will look at a little bit further in this, and he's going to get into the actual signs of his coming and how staggering they are. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.